The 1988 season has now reached its conclusion. Let's take a look back at Streamline's first season in Formula 1, featuring the ups, the downs, and everything in between. This series has a simple premise. We make a Formula 1 team, we grow that team, and eventually we win the World Championship. Easy, right? Well, it's not without its tribulations. The British team known as Streamline was formed at the start of 1988 and entered onto the grid to join the other 17 competing teams. The owner of the team, known as Barry Goodman, hired James Early, that's me, to oversee operations and to hopefully lead the team up the grid. Goodman outlined two key objectives for the season. Number one was to qualify for all the races. 26 cars were allowed to take part in the Grand Prix, yet there were 31 entrants, meaning qualifying would eliminate the slowest cars. Objective number two was to finish at least 50% of the races. A 16-race season means that 50% would be 8 races completed. A budget of close to zero meant that Streamline were only able to field a single car team, but did attract the services of British driver Martin Brundle. Brundle was full of optimism upon signing for Streamline, and I'm sure nothing will shake that optimism in the coming races. So the F1 circus headed to Brazil for the opening round of the season. McLaren were overwhelming favourites for the title, with their lineup of Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna, whilst Streamline had the 16th best car and outlined their main challengers as both Zach Speed and Eurobrun. Mr. Early held an interview on the Thursday in which he warmed himself to the press.
Probably less corporate and more crazy. And I'd say I'm on the side of crazy.
Streamline were required to enter pre-qualifying for at least the first half of the season, and the pre-qualifying session in Brazil was no issue for Brundle, as he comfortably made it to the main qualifying session. Brundle did make a few mistakes in that first qualifying session and blamed the car rather than his own ability, yet his fastest time was good enough to line up 21st place on the grid. The opening stages of the race consisted of Brundle complaining about the amount of drag on the car, whilst battling with fellow backmarker Bernd Schneider. Ferrari's Michele Alboreto led through the pit stop phase, whilst Brundle was occupying the back end of the top 20. Two-time world champion Alain Prost was involved in a nasty crash at turn 1, and through all the carnage, Brundle was fighting up in 11th place on the last couple of laps. He went on to make a mistake and eventually coasted home in a respectable 13th place, as home favourite Ayrton Senna won on his McLaren debut. Schneider achieved 12th place for Zach Speed, which meant that Streamline were trailing their rivals in the championship at this stage. Going into the San Marino Grand Prix, Brundle was reportedly happy with the first race weekend, but Streamline was smacked with a taste of reality in the race. Brundle, who once again did brilliantly in qualifying to line up in 22nd, certainly struggled a lot in the race and eventually retired in an incident that he claimed was suspension related. It was a weekend of bad luck for many drivers, with Nakajima, Alboreto and Bailey suffering injuries after their respective crashes. Piquet went on to claim victory after Ayrton Senna suffered a late brake failure. Teammate Alain Prost started the season with back-to-back retirements and found himself down in 25th place in the standings. The third round was Monaco. Brundle admitted fault for the crash at San Marino, and all was well in the team again. Team boss Goodman stressed the importance of this circuit as it suited our car characteristics the best. It was Berger who claimed pole position for the race, as Brundle achieved a season best 18th on the grid, which showed the capabilities of the car. However, the race itself was a huge letdown for the team, with the Ford engine expiring early on, leaving Brundle angry. The battle for the victory was between Berger, Piquet and Senna, and it went down to the wire. Piquet eventually came out on top. Roberto Marino, filling in for Alboreto at Ferrari, cruised home to a fantastic 4th place, whilst Prost got off the mark for the season. It was Senna and Prost on the front row in Mexico, as Brundle only just made the grid in 26th place. Clearly the high-speed layout not favouring the Streamline. Brundle and the Tyrrell of Jonathan Palmer were involved in an intense battle throughout the race. Championship leader Piquet stalled on the grid, whilst his compatriot Senna retired from the lead early on. Prost lapped all but one of his competitors en route to his first victory of the season. Just like that, we reached the quarter distance point in the season. It's Piquet, Senna, Berger in the Drivers' Championship, McLaren just ahead of both Ferrari and Lotus in the Constructors. Due to Streamline's strong results at the opening round of the season, the team sits in 14th place. Canada saw the return of Michele Alboreto from injury, just in time for another bout of drivers to hit the sidelines. Both Gugelmin and Perez Sala suffered crashes in qualifying, leading to the pair of them missing the race. Mansell went on to crash during the Grand Prix, and it meant he would miss the Detroit Grand Prix. Back on the topic of Streamline, the team had brought their first batch of upgrades to the car, working on the new body concept. Unfortunately, it arrived at a time where all of Streamline's competitors brought upgrades as well. It was being reported in the media that Martin Brundle was not happy at the team team and is already looking for a move away from Streamline prior to the end of the season. If qualifying was anything to go by, it was clear Brundle was driving out of his skin with a 19th place finish in the quali session. However, an unfortunate late engine failure whilst running in 13th place was not what Brundle had in mind. Prost led home in McLaren 1-2 with Alboreto snatching a podium on his return. Johnny Herbert continued to impress in place of injured driver Nakajima as Herbert scored his first F1 points. And so, F1 remained in North America for round 6, the Detroit Grand Prix. Martin Brundle confirmed to the team that he would not be renewing his contract amidst a period where Streamline was searching for a reserve driver. The team approached Martin Donnelly, Mika Häkkinen and John Alesi, with Donnelly being the only driver interested. He was hired for the remainder of the season. Everything was going according to plan, with McLaren and Ferrari locking out the front 2 rows. New championship leader Senna started in front of his teammate Prost, who had won the previous 2 Grand Prix, but neither of them would have expected what was to come in this race. An incredible rate of attrition early on saw Senna and Piquet out within the first 5 laps. Alboreto's engine gave way shortly after and teammate Berger's suspension collapsed on lap 14. Prost had gearbox issues which forced him out, and that left Johnny Herbert to lead the race in his Lotus. As the race progressed, the positions switched around due to differing strategies, and it meant that American driver Eddie Cheever found his way to the front, leading the march of Capelli and Cheever's teammate Warwick in third. Capelli's car suffered the same fate as Prost earlier on, and it meant that the race concluded with Cheever heading at Arrows 1-2 with Gugelmin completing the podium. The Lotus of Herbert scored more points, and both LaRousse and Minardi got off the mark. Brundle finished 3 laps down in 14th place. France wasn't much better for Streamline. Bad news arrived prior to the race weekend as team sponsors Toshiba notified us that they would not be open to renegotiating their sponsorship, leaving the team without a good source of income. In qualifying, even Capelli's March veered off the road at the first corner and collided heavily with the wall. Capelli would miss the remainder of the season, whilst the Briton of Andy Wallace came in to replace him. Prost retired from his home Grand Prix whilst teammate Senna went on to win, opening an 11-point lead in the championship. Martin Brundle retired due to brake failure in the closing stages of the race. Yannick Daumas picked up back-to-back points for LaRousse, whilst the Osella of Nicola Larini secured his first finish of the year in 9th place. Round 8 was Streamline's first home Grand Prix, and with that came higher expectations from team owner Barry Goodman. Paragon, a financial services company operating out of the UK, were announced as the replacement sponsor for the outgoing Toshiba. Brundle made the grid and it was Senna on pole once again. The race was underway and Prost, who had started in 2nd place, had slipped down to 9th. The Frenchman was forced to make a comeback drive through the field to salvage a result and climbed all the way up to 2nd place as Senna secured victory. Brundle brought the car home in 13th place, but crucially that was ahead of 4 other cars on track, which showed how good of a race that had been. The result equalled Streamline's best result of the season, and this was the standings at the halfway stage of the year. It was Senna out on his own at the top of the Drivers' Championship. Teammate Alain Prost had now climbed above Piquet and into 2nd place. Streamline's Martin Brundle languished down in 32nd place. In the Constructors, it was McLaren with a dominant lead over 2nd place Ferrari, who was still in a battle with Lotus. Arrows, after their 1-2 finish, were up in 4th place, and Streamline have slipped down to 17th, only ahead of the single car entry of Coloni. Off to Germany, and the pre-race information was that Stefan Johansson wants to be considered for a seat at Streamline for 1989. The pre-qualifying rules have changed, with Streamline not needing to take part in pre-qualifying for the remainder of the season due to their qualified performances up to this point. And in an ironic twist, this so happened to be the first race where Martin Brundle failed to qualify. The race up at the front was a done deal at the start. Senna led Prost to a McLaren 1-2 as the pair lapped the entire field. Nakajima, on his 3rd race back from injury, grasped his first podium of the season. Andy Wallace, filling in for the injured Capelli, scored his first points in Formula 1 with a strong drive to P6. Alboreto had more misfortune after a heavy crash during the race, which would see him sidelined for the next 2 months. Moving on to Hungary, there were rumours in the air that Lotus might be looking to replace Nakajima, who had just scored a podium at the previous race. Nakajima then reached out to James Early to discuss potential contract negotiations for 1989. Barry Goodman expressed his displeasure at the failure to qualify for the German Grand Prix, which had meant that Early had failed one of the pre-season objectives. Brundle qualified in Hungary, and it was a rare appearance on the grid for Zakspeed, as Schneider got the German team their 3rd race appearance of the season. The race was was lacklustre for Brundle, who finished last of the running order, but the drama at the front was great. Senna encountering issues with a stricken Patrese late on meant that the Brazilian missed out on the podium. The Ferrari of Gerhard Berger went on to claim his team's first victory of the season to end his barren run of 5 straight retirements. Streamline, along with the rest of the Ford runners, all received an engine upgrade ahead of the Belgium and Italy rounds of the season. Ron Dennis assured fans that Prost was going to remain at McLaren for 1989 amidst rumours that Ferrari were looking to replace Alboreto. The Belgian Grand Prix was a damp affair early on, and it was the scene of a double McLaren retirement. Numerous incidents throughout the race led Martin Brundle to achieve his best result of the season with 10th place, Streamline's first top 10 result. This placing of 10th place lifted Streamline above Zakspeed in the Constructors' Championship. Meanwhile, Gerhard Berger claimed back-to-back victories and shoehorned his way into the championship battle. Ligier picked up their first points of the season as well. James Early was tasked with picking between a 3-driver shortlist to fill Brundle's position for next year. Alex Caffey, Stefan Johansson and Andrea de Cesaris were all considered, but in the end it was Johansson who signed. The race in Italy was dull for Brundle, who made the grid but could only muster 19th place in the race, once again last of the running order. It was a return to form for McLaren as Senna led home Prost for yet another 1-2 finish. With 4 rounds to go, Senna boasted a 20-point lead over Prost in the championship. It also meant that only Senna, Prost, Berger and Piquet could now mathematically win said championship. The Portuguese Grand Prix started with bad news as Streamline's technical director Matt Hughes announced he would be leaving the team after contract negotiations had broken down. Senna had the chance to win the championship this weekend if results went his way, and Michele Alboreto returned from injury for the second time this season. Qualifying was a tense affair as Brundle only just scraped through onto the grid. Berger claimed pole position for Ferrari, with Senna in second. In the race, it was once again an engine failure that saw Brundle retire, and the same fate hit Gerhard Berger. Senna led comfortably until an incident with a backmarker forced the champion in waiting into the pits. This opened the door for a miraculous victory for the returning Michele Alboreto, the driver who might not even have a seat next year, winning the race. Prost finished in second with Senna down in 5th, which meant the championship fight would go on for at least another round. At the Spanish Grand Prix, Martin Donnelly was confirmed to be the second driver at Streamline next year as the team promoted from within. Streamline's plan is to expand to a 2-car entry for 1989. Prost is confirmed to be moving to Ferrari next year, which has meant that Alboreto has jumped ship to Osella after winning a race. Senna just needed to outscore Prost by 4 points to claim the championship this weekend, but the shock in qualifying was that Prost lined up first with his teammate down in 6th. In the race, it was a Martin Brundle engine failure, again. The focus was on the championship battle, however, which took yet another turn as Senna had a coming together with Alboreto halfway through the Grand Prix. Prost romped to victory ahead of Nakajima and Mansell as the gap in the championship was cut to just 6 points. Prost's points haul was enough for McLaren to secure the Constructors' Championship with 2 races to spare. Heading into Japan, Senna's ability to perform under pressure was questioned by the media, but he put those rumours to bed by storming to pole position. The race, however, was once again a different story. Shortly after Brundle suffered his complimentary engine failure for the day, Senna made a terrible mistake and went wide and clashed into the stricken Brundle's vehicle to leave his teammate Alain Prost to win yet again. This result meant that heading into the final round at Adelaide, Prost now had the lead in the championship for the first time. And so the title went down to the wire between the 2 McLaren drivers. Adelaide was the location for the battle. Streamline boss James Early was under pressure, already failing 1 target for the season. He did have the chance to meet the second objective of finishing half of the season's races, with a finish at Adelaide, but in qualifying the conditions caught Brundle out and he failed to make it onto the grid for the second time this season. The conditions caught a lot of drivers out in that session. Most importantly, it caught the Brazilian of Senna out, who would line up down in 10th on the grid whilst Prost started in 1st. The lights went out and it was drama immediately. Nakajima's stationary car caused Senna to damage his own. As the race progressed, it was clear Senna would need a miracle to win from here, as his car had sustained an incredible level of damage. Piquet and Alboreto collided on lap 1, leaving Piquet down in 23rd place. The battle at the front was fascinating, with the lead changing every few laps. Boutsen, Mansell, Prost, Berger and Warwick were all in the mix. Eventually, it was Gerhard Berger who crossed the line to win his 3rd race of the season and cap off a stellar second half of the campaign for Ferrari. Prost crossed the line in 4th place, but it was enough for the Frenchman to be crowned a 3-time world champion, whilst Senna limped his damaged McLaren home home in 9th place. And that, my friends, was the 1988 season in my Streamline career mode series. It was a learning year for our small team, but with 2 fresh drivers in 1989 of Johansson and Donnelly, I'm super confident we can build on what we have achieved this year. If you want to go back and watch any of the races, the link to the playlist is in the description. Make sure to give the video a like and of course, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.